Dineo stood in the cold rain, her clothes soaked and heavy, while her two small children clung to her, crying and shaking from the cold. She looked at the house where she had once called home, but now the door was slammed shut in her face. Inside, her husband Kwesi was laughing with his new mistress, not caring that his wife and children were standing outside with nowhere to go. The man she had loved and supported had thrown her out like she was nothing, all because he wanted a new woman. Dineo's heart broke as she held her children tighter, trying to shield them from the storm. Strangers passed by, some staring, some whispering, but no one stopped to help. Her body was weak, her stomach empty, but her spirit refused to die. That night, as the rain poured harder, Dineo looked up at the dark sky and made a silent promise. She swore that this would be the last night her children would suffer. She swore that the world would one day know her name, not as the woman who was thrown away, but as someone who rose from the ground. No one believed in her at that moment, not even herself. But deep inside, something powerful was born, a fire that no rain could put out. While Kwesi thought he had won by choosing his mistress and slamming the door, he had no idea that he had just opened another door for Dineo, a door that would lead her to a destiny bigger than she ever imagined. This night of pain and shame was only the beginning of a story that would soon shock everyone. Dineo had given her whole life to Kwesi. When they first started, they had nothing but dreams. It was Dineo who believed in him when nobody else did. She sold her gold earrings, her mother's necklace, and even her wedding ring just to raise money for his small business. There were nights when there was barely enough food, but Dineo would smile and tell her children to eat first while she quietly went to bed, hungry. She skipped meals, not because she wanted to lose weight, but because she wanted Kwesi and the kids to have enough. When Kwesi fell sick and couldn't get out of bed, it was Dineo who stayed up all night wiping his sweat, feeding him soup with shaky hands, and praying that he would get better. She carried his burdens like they were her own, never once complaining, never once asking for anything in return. All she wanted was to see her family rise together, and when success finally came, when money started flowing, and Kwesi's name became known in the city, Dineo thought their struggles were over. She dreamed that they would now enjoy the fruits of their hard work as a family. But that dream was crushed in the cruelest way, because the moment Kwesi tasted success, he changed. He started wearing expensive clothes, driving flashy cars, and suddenly he was ashamed of his past. He began looking at Dineo and their children like they were weights pulling him down. He called Dineo old-fashioned, saying she didn't fit into his new, rich lifestyle. He started spending more time outside, coming home late with the smell of perfume that wasn't hers. Then came Amma, the beautiful woman who whispered sweet lies into his ears, making him believe that Dineo was nothing but a burden. Kwesi, the man Dineo had sacrificed everything for, now looked her in the eyes and said she was holding him back. The same woman who skipped meals so he could eat, the woman who sold her last piece of jewelry so he could build his dream, he now called her useless. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. It wasn't just the pain of losing her husband, but the pain of knowing that all her sacrifices meant nothing to him. Dineo felt like her heart had been ripped out, but even in that deep hurt, she didn't cry in front of him. She stood there silent, while he packed his things to go be with Amma, leaving her and the children behind like they were trash. It was a wound so deep that even words couldn't explain. But what Kwesi didn't know was that this wound would one day become Dineo's greatest strength. Amma came into Kwesi's life like a storm, all beauty and sweet words. She knew exactly what to say to make him feel like a king. She told him that he deserved better than a simple, old-fashioned woman like Dineo. She laughed and said that Dineo was only good for cooking and cleaning, not for a successful man like him. Every day, Amma whispered more lies into Kwesi's ears. She told him that his children were holding him back, that they were too much responsibility, and that if he wanted to enjoy his new rich life, he needed to be free from them. At first, Kwesi tried to ignore these words, but slowly, they started to poison his mind. The man who once carried his children on his back now started seeing them as problems. The woman who stood by him in hard times now looked like a weight he needed to drop. Amma made sure to always remind Kwesi of what he could have: freedom, parties, luxury, if only he let go of his old life. And Kwesi, blinded by greed and lust, fell deeper into her trap. He started avoiding home, spending nights with Amma in fancy hotels, while Dineo stayed up waiting, worried and praying. Soon, his heart turned cold, like a stone. There was no more love in his eyes when he looked at Dineo and their children, only anger and shame, planted there by Ama's wicked words. And then, one rainy evening, Kwesi did the unthinkable. He ordered Dineo and the children to pack their things and leave. He didn't care where they would go. He didn't care if they had food or shelter. All he cared about was starting a new life with Ama, free from the family that once meant everything to him. Dineo begged, her children cried, but Kwesi's heart was too far gone. He slammed the door, choosing Ama over the woman and kids who had given him their all. Neighbors watched in shock, but no one dared to stop him. He believed he had won. He believed he was starting fresh, rich, and powerful. But what Kwesi didn't know was that fate was watching. Life has a way of turning tables, and while he thought he was rising, his fall had already begun. Ama's lies had broken his family, but soon they would also break him. Because no matter how far you run from your blood, the truth always finds a way back. And for Kwesi, that truth was coming faster than he ever expected. Dineo's life changed overnight. One day she had a home, even if it was filled with pain. The next, she and her little children were on the streets with only the clothes on their backs. The rain didn't stop, and the cold crept into their bones. They had no money, no food, and no one willing to help. People they once called friends turned away, pretending not to see them. At night, Dineo wrapped her children close to her body, trying to keep them warm as they slept on the hard pavement. Their little stomachs growled from hunger, but there was nothing she could give them. The once proud woman now had to beg for coins at the market, just to buy a piece of bread to share among her children. Every rejection cut her heart deeper, but she had no choice. She had to survive for the sake of her kids. As days turned into weeks, their clothes became dirty and torn. The children's laughter faded, replaced by silence and tears. Dineo looked in the mirror of a shop one day and barely recognized the tired, broken woman staring back. She felt like a failure, like someone who had lost everything. But what Dineo didn't know was that someone had been watching her all this time. An old woman named Ma Abena sat quietly by the corner of the market. She sold herbs and fruits, and most people ignored her, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. She had watched Dineo from the very first day she appeared on the streets. She saw how Dineo, even in her pain, still comforted her children with soft words. She noticed how Dineo, though hungry herself, gave the last piece of bread to her smallest child. Ma Abena saw something strong inside Dineo, a fire that hadn't completely died, even if Dineo herself had forgotten it was there. The old woman knew suffering when she saw it. She had once been through her own storms, and she could tell that Dineo's story wasn't meant to end like this. So Ma Abena kept watching, waiting for the right time to step in. While others saw a homeless woman begging on the streets, Ma Abena saw a warrior, a mother with a spirit that could rise again if only given a chance. Deep inside, the old woman felt that fate had brought Dineo into her path for a reason. And soon, very soon, Dineo's life was going to take a turn that not even she could have imagined. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to see your worth when the whole world has turned its back on you. And Ma Abena was that person. It was just another hard day at the market for Dineo. Her stomach was empty, her body weak, but her eyes stayed on her children, making sure they were safe. She had only managed to beg a few coins that morning, and even that wasn't enough to buy proper food. Her heart ached, but she kept going, because giving up wasn't an option. As she sat by the corner, watching people pass by without a glance, a loud cry suddenly caught her attention. She turned and saw a young boy lying on the ground, blood running from a deep cut on his leg. The boy had fallen while running, and instead of helping, people just walked past, too busy with their own troubles. Without thinking, Dineo got up and rushed to the boy. She tore a piece from her already torn skirt and wrapped it around his wound to stop the bleeding. Her own hunger and pain didn't matter at that moment. All she saw was a child in need. She gently spoke to him, calming his cries, and stayed with him until help arrived. What Dineo didn't know was that the boy's father had been watching everything from a distance. That man was not an ordinary market seller. He was Mr. Mensa, the owner of one of the biggest trading companies in the city, a powerful man known for his sharp eyes and even sharper mind. When he reached his son and saw the care Dineo had shown, despite her own suffering, he was deeply moved. He asked people around about her and learned about her story, how she had been thrown out by her husband and was now struggling on the streets with her children. Mr. Mensah couldn't believe such a strong, kind-hearted woman was living like this. He felt something stir in his heart. Right there, he made a decision. He called Dineo aside and asked her if she wanted a chance to work, to rebuild her life. Dineo, shocked and speechless, could only nod as tears rolled down her cheeks. She couldn't believe someone was finally seeing her worth after all this time. Mr. Mensah told her to come to his office the next day, promising to give her a small job to start with. That one simple act of kindness, helping an injured boy, became the turning point in Dineo's life. It was as if the doors that had been shut for so long were now beginning to open. And little did she know, this chance was only the beginning of a new journey that would change everything for her and her children. Fate had finally started to smile on her. Dineo started her new job quietly, with no big dreams, just hope for food on her children's plates. She arrived early every morning at Mr. Mensah's trading company, sweeping floors, cleaning tables, and doing whatever small task was given to her. But there was something special about the way she worked. She did every job with care, never complained, and always wore a soft smile even when her hands were tired. The staff noticed her honesty. When she found a missing wallet in the bathroom, she returned it without a second thought. Mr. Mensah noticed too. He saw how trustworthy and hard-working Dineo was, and slowly he started giving her more important tasks. First, he moved her to the stockroom, where she managed goods. Then, when she handled that well, he let her assist with customer orders. Each time, Dineo gave her best, learning new skills quietly, asking questions, and improving every single day. Within months, people were talking about the once homeless woman who was now becoming a key part of the company. She didn't brag, didn't rush. She just kept working with her heart. And slowly, promotions came one after another. Her salary grew, and she could finally rent a small house and send her children to school. For the first time in a long while, they went to bed with full stomachs and hope in their hearts. But while Dineo's star was rising, far away, Kwesi's world was falling apart. The business he had built on lies and greed started showing cracks. His mistress, Amma, who once sweet-talked him, now demanded more and more money. Kwesi made risky deals, cheated partners, and ignored warnings. Soon, the news spread. His company was involved in scandals. Banks refused to lend him money, customers left, and his so-called friends turned their back. The empire he threw his family away for began to sink like a stone in water. As Dineo quietly climbed the ladder, Kwesi was drowning in debts and shame. The man who once slammed the door on his wife and children now faced empty accounts and court cases. The same people who once praised him now whispered about his fall. And the most painful part? Everywhere he turned, he heard Dineo's name. People admired her strength and success. Investors who once worked with Kwesi now wanted to do business with Mr. Mensah's company, where Dineo was becoming a shining star. The tables were turning slowly, but surely. Life, which had once been so cruel to Dineo, was now lifting her up, and the same life that Kwesi thought he had under control was slipping through his fingers. Step by step, Dineo's silent rise was becoming a powerful story that everyone in the city would soon hear. The day the newspapers hit the streets, the whole city stopped to read. Big bold letters screamed, "From street beggar to business tycoon's right hand." And right there, below the headline, was a picture of Dineo, smiling gently, dressed in fine clothes, standing beside Mr. Mensah, the powerful man who now trusted her more than anyone else in his company. People who had once walked past her and her children when they were sleeping on pavements now stared in shock. The same woman they ignored was now being called a hero, an inspiration. Radio stations talked about her story. TV shows invited her for interviews, and social media was filled with her pictures and words of praise. Investors from far and near, who once never noticed Dineo, now lined up to meet her. They saw her as a symbol of honesty and strength, someone they could trust with their business. Company leaders and big names in the trade world praised her, saying she was the heart and soul of Mr. Mensah's growing empire. Some even said that without Dineo, the company would not have reached such great heights. People respected her, not just for her success, but for the way she stayed humble and kind, never forgetting where she came from. And her children, oh, how their lives changed. The same kids who were once laughed at and called beggars now walked through the city with their heads high. They wore clean school uniforms, their shoes shined, and their faces glowed with pride. Teachers praised them, and classmates who once mocked them now wanted to be their friends. Dineo's success was not just her own, it lifted her entire family. But in another part of the city, Kwesi sat in silence, watching it all unfold. The man who had once thrown Dineo and his children out into the rain now flipped through the newspapers with trembling hands. Every headline felt like a slap. He saw the woman he had called useless, now being celebrated by the whole world. He heard people saying, "Look at Dineo, she's a queen now," and it cut him deeper than any wound. Kwesi's own name was now connected with failure and scandal. His business was gone, his mistress had left him, and his so-called friends no longer answered his calls. All he had left was bitterness and regret, and as he watched Dineo shine, he realized too late that the woman he had thrown away had become a star so bright that even he couldn't escape her light. The city couldn't stop talking. Everyone loved the story of the woman who rose from nothing to greatness. Dineo's journey from dust to diamonds became a lesson, a warning, and a beacon of hope all at once, and it was just the beginning. The day Kwesi walked into Dineo's office, the whole building went silent. The same man who once kicked his wife and children out into the cold was now standing there, looking like a shadow of his former self. His clothes were worn out, his face thin and tired, and his eyes were red from crying. He wasn't the proud man everyone used to fear. Now, he was broken, desperate, and ashamed. He fell to his knees right there at the entrance of her grand office, where important people came and went every day. Tears streamed down Kwesi's face as he begged Dineo to forgive him. His voice shook as he said, "Please, Dineo, I was blind. I made a terrible mistake. I've lost everything. My business, my home, my so-called friends. Even Amma has left me. You and the children are all I have left. Please, take me back." His hands trembled as he reached out to her, not caring that the same people who once mocked Dineo were now watching him grovel on the floor like a beggar. The workers and leaders in the office, who had heard whispers about Dineo's painful past, stood frozen. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The once powerful Kwesi, the man who had thrown Dineo away like trash, was now crying and begging at her feet. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone waited to hear what Dineo would say. Dineo stood tall, dressed in her elegant suit, looking down at the man who had once humiliated her. Her heart remembered the cold nights on the street, the tears of her children, and the shame she felt when he chose another woman over her. But now the tables had turned. She took a deep breath and said, in a calm but firm voice, "Kwesi, the door you slammed on me and our children that rainy night will never open for you again. My children and I have moved on. We survived without you, and today, I choose to close that chapter forever." Her words cut through the room like a knife. Kwesi's face turned pale. He looked around and saw the judging eyes of the people who once cheered for his success. Now, they whispered about his fall. Dineo didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm rejection was more powerful than any shout. Kwesi covered his face in shame, knowing that he had just faced the biggest humiliation of his life, not behind closed doors, but in front of everyone. As Dineo turned and walked back to her desk, her staff burst into silent nods of respect. No one pitied Kwesi. Everyone admired the woman who rose from nothing and stood strong against the man who once tried to destroy her. And that day, Dineo's story became even more legendary. Dineo looked at Kwesi, still kneeling on the floor, his face wet with tears. Everyone in the office held their breath, waiting to see what she would do. Would she choose revenge? Would she throw him out the way he once threw her and their children into the rain? The whole city was watching now. News of Kwesi's downfall and Dineo's rise had already spread everywhere. People whispered, will she punish him, or will she forgive? Even those who once laughed at her were now waiting to hear her answer. For a moment, Dineo's mind flashed back to the nights she and her children slept on the streets. She remembered the pain, the hunger, the shame. She remembered how Kwesi chose his mistress over his family, how he believed she was nothing. All that hurt could have made her heart hard. It would have been easy to humiliate him the same way he humiliated her. It would have felt good to make him suffer. But Dineo was no longer that broken woman standing in the rain. She had grown, she had risen, and now she had a choice. She walked slowly towards Kwesi. The room was so quiet, even his sobs sounded loud. Standing tall, she looked him in the eye and said, "Kwesi, I will not destroy you, not because you deserve mercy, but because my children deserve a mother who teaches them strength, not hate." Her voice was calm but powerful. "You taught me pain, but I will teach my children forgiveness and dignity. I will not let your darkness dim our light." The people in the room blinked in shock. No one expected those words. Some had hoped for drama, for a scene where Dineo would throw him out, but instead she gave the city a lesson that true power is not in revenge, but in rising above. Kwesi bowed his head lower, too ashamed to even speak. He knew he had lost everything, his wealth, his pride, and even the chance for revenge against him. And now, Dineo had shown the whole community what real strength looked like. Word spread fast. People in the market, in homes, on the streets began to say, "Did you hear what Dineo said? She didn't take revenge. She chose grace. She is truly powerful." Mothers told their children her story. Leaders praised her for her wisdom. Even those who once mocked her now admired her. Dineo turned and walked away from Kwesi, not out of weakness, but out of strength. She had won, not just in business, but in character. And her decision that day echoed through the whole community, reminding everyone that rising above hate is the greatest victory of all. Dineo's life completely changed. No longer the woman who stood in the rain, she became a symbol of strength and hope for so many. With the wealth and respect she had earned, she didn't just enjoy her success alone. Instead, she looked around at the struggling mothers she once shared the streets with, and her heart knew what to do. Dineo used her money to build homes for women who had been abandoned, just like she was. She opened shelters where no mother would have to sleep on cold pavements with her children again. People called her the mother of the forgotten, and everywhere she went, crowds cheered her name. Her children, who once walked with their heads down in shame, now stood tall with pride. They remembered the hunger, the pain, and the cold nights, and they turned their past into power. Her eldest daughter started a foundation to help children stay in school, while her son created programs to teach young people skills so they could build a better future. They became leaders, not because they were born rich, but because they had survived and risen above. Everywhere, Dineo's family became the light that guided others out of darkness. Mothers told their children, "Look at Dineo's kids. They were once like us, and now they are changing the world." Her story gave hope to the hopeless, strength to the weak, and courage to those who wanted to give up. And Kwesi, his name became a warning. People whispered his story in markets and homes. Don't be like Kwesi, who threw away gold for glitter and ended up with nothing. He walked the streets, a shadow of the proud man he once was, while Dineo shined brighter every day. His fall became the lesson, but Dineo and her children became the inspiration everyone looked up to.